right off the bat, like I know it's like, oh, you're black pilling me. I mean, come on, dude. So that's so like 3 years ago. But what I'm saying is, like when we bring certain things up, which makes things a little more nuanced, a little more nuanced, we should say, a little more complicated than just my side and their side. It's not. We're not doing that to be like obstinate, or we're just trying to really. You need to understand the complexities of a situation. I'll just leave it at that. So, well, one thing I noticed, we were talking the other day, and this is going to lead into the next video we did. In the Wargaming magazine that I get every now and then, Strategy and Tactics. It's a great historical thing. It's mostly history and tactics. You can read between the lines. You could you could make your own opinions. On the analysis, maybe a little different from theirs, but one conflict I was not aware of. Okay, I know about the Easter Rising in Ireland. Okay? I was not aware of the civil war that broke out between the factions of the IRA afterwards. Essentially, the IRA, like Michael Collins people, and they wanted to make the deal with the British. Then you had a lot of IRA guys that they're like, no, we're not making a deal. We want the whole island. And of course, the faction that wanted to make the deal with the British, ironically, had funding and weapons from the British. So there was this civil war that occurred that was pretty nasty. Pretty nasty reading it. Of course, the faction that didn't want to compromise was sort of outgunned. Or they were pretty much reduced to trying to do assassinations. They had the flying columns. If you remember, like the term flying column is usually a leftist term. You could think maybe these were the Marxist factions of the IRA, but the idea of flying columns, the IWW had those, but those were kind of like to protect the workers from getting robbed on the trains out west. But that's pretty much all they had were the gunmen, right, as they call them. The gunmen was like what the Irish would call them. The war was pretty one-sided. Michael Collins got assassinated, but man, there was one thing where like they took a bunch of the anti-compromise IRA guys, tied them to each other, and like put an explosive on them and blew them up. And they found out about it because the one guy survived and told the rest of the world. But pretty much it was eventually there was some kind of they sort of made peace, I guess, but there was always this uneasiness of it. So after all that, it was just interesting to see like these dudes did things to each other that they didn't even do to the damn British, the damn English, right? And you see that throughout history, not just Europeans, everybody. Nobody goes at each other harder and with more like I don't know, savagery than people of the same group disagreeing. So anyway, that's my lead in.
That seems to have been a truism throughout history. Industrial wars seem to change that, where people, for instance, in the American Revolution, the loyalist people, the loyalist Americans, and the patriots, when they went at each other, it was a lot nastier and more brutal than when the Continental Army went against the British Army. And in the American Civil War, some of the nastiest business was when people, pro-Union and pro-Confederacy people in Tennessee went at it.
Oh, yeah.
And that extended to after the end of the Civil War, when the governor of Tennessee actually announced that they were going to, they didn't use the term genocide, but they were going to kill all of the men that fought for the Confederacy.
Oh, that went over well, I'm sure.
And that didn't go over at all because four guys got together and they decided to make a secret militia organization, and they nominated Nathan Bedford Forrest to lead it.
Oh,
and
those dudes.
He of, eventually he was disappointed with uh, how it turned into something else in other states, and he did negotiate with somebody from Washington D.C. and he told them, whereas he only had 4,000 men to fight the Union during the war, that he now had 40,000 men under arms, and they should really call off this guy that wants to kill all of his fellow Tennesseans that fought on the losing side. So that's another example of that. The man that, the earliest example of this being described, I believe, was when Arrian was writing about the Theban debacle, which was when exiles that were at the Persian court, who were, you might call them traitors, they were ousted by their fellows, and every Greek community had exiles who were the party that was out of power, and they were at the Persian court, and they were essentially the advisors and the spies to the King of Kings as to how to deal with their own people, and they would be sent back to foment civil wars and encourage uprisings. And Athenians also did this at the start of the Peloponnesian War, where they had agitators and exiles in smaller Greek city-states that they funded for their political purposes to cause revolutions. So when the Theban exiles talked the people of Thebes to rise up against Alexander, at the very time he was leaving Greece, they were talked into uprising before he left Greece. So if it was really being done for their own good and their own freedom, they would have waited until after the guy with the smashing machine left.
Yeah.
But these people, these exiles, talked them into rising up against him, doing it in a nasty way by killing some of his people and some of their own people. And then when he asked them to desist and promised that they would, that he would not punish them if they just quit, they refused. They decided that it was better to fight to the death, okay, rather than negotiate with him. So they attack his troops. They, of course, get defeated, and the people that fomented the uprising were the rich guys from overseas. They had their horses waiting. They got on their horses, they left, and all the working class and middle class dudes that they talked into, who they had convinced that Alexander was going to execute them, which had not been his policy, he hadn't done that. They were all left there to face not Alexander's wrath, but the wrath of their neighbors, who they had been doing horrible things to. It was, Boeotia was the name of the area. It meant good cattle land. The Thebans had voted to exterminate all the Athenians during the Peloponnesian War. Okay, but the other Greeks didn't go along with that. But what they did do is they did horrible things, killed large percentages of other Boeotians from the area, like the little community of Plataea, which they tried to exterminate. So Alexander left the fate of Thebes up to these people. It would be like leaving the fate of Baltimore City up to the people that lived in the small towns around Baltimore that had all been driven out of Baltimore City by Baltimoreans, right? So this is the biggest digression in Arrian's whole account of Alexander's career, was the fact that what happened to Thebes pretty much horrified everybody, even the people that did it, once it was over. Because
bad blood.
They were the most powerful city-state at the time in Greece, and they were just gone in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Now, not all they were not all killed. Of the 25,000 men, 5,000 of them were killed, and then every other person except for Alexander's friends and the descendants of the poet Pindar were all sold into slavery, which was a complete genocide.
Right.
Because all their bloodlines were lost.
Yeah.
The men are being worked to death. The women are carrying other races of children in their womb. Arian states that any time when people of the same blood decide their feud by physical means, that this can be expected.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so he was a Greek, but he was a Roman citizen. So even though he was writing about something that happened 500 years before in his homeland, he was well aware of what happened 200 years earlier in the Roman Republic. When the Romans went at it with each other, it was even nastier than when they went at it with the barbarians.
Yeah, well, that's just familiarity breeds contempt, but obviously, you know, whether it's families, whether it's, you know, the wonderful wars earlier in the last century in Europe, which is pretty much decided our fate.
Now, but in the industrial wars, though, it does seem that once you got the technology allowed you to remove from the other side, then you would see nastier stuff against people of other races. And this is interesting to me because when you get a higher level of technology that removes you from like hand-to-hand combat, it seems like then you got a situation where people of enemy races go on the bug hunt and they really don't treat the other ones like humans. But when it's hand-to-hand with swords, it seems like people of other races tend to be treated with, with more compassion than people of the same race when there's a feud. So, of course, we're talking about ancient definitions of race.
Well, the ancient definitions of race.
Which is really different from the modern definitions of race. They're essentially, I would call them macrozoological. You know, they're kind of artificial definitions.
Well, by ancient world standards, I am a mixed race person.
Well, yeah, and you and I wouldn't be the same race by ancient standards.
Right.
And even, not just ancient, 250 years ago. 200 years ago, you and I wouldn't be regarded as members of the same race.
Right.
You know, because we don't have, so what, you're German and Italian.
Right. Well, yeah.
Irish, English, and German.
Right.
So maybe I would be more of a half-breed than you.
And you're the slave German. I got the cool, like, almost beat the world German.
Yeah, so I don't know.
That's good.
I don't know what Aryans seem to be of the opinion that it had to do with the actual something in the blood, like a like cleansing rage process or something.
Really? That's an interesting concept.
Because he specifically used the term blood when people with the same blood. So it's interesting, and that does track when you get into, like we're discussing, the revolutions of something as recent as 100 years ago. So that's interesting, and I don't expect to ever get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Well, you know, they're just like I said. At least in World War II, there was equality. The people that looked just like the Americans and the British were firebombed, and then the dirty Japs were then also firebombed. So.
Well, yeah, but those were different races.
Yeah,
you know, if you're going by Aryans' definitions, so you can't say Europeans on Europeans is are different races of people if we're using most of history as a reference. That's like a very recent construct. I think maybe a better example would be the fact that in plantation America, European slaves were worked to death and beaten to death at much higher rates and starved to death
Oh,
at much higher rates than European American masters did to Africans. Africans were treated with much more compassion and as members of the extended family.
yeah, right.
Even when it was an English master over an English slave, that English slave was treated worse than any
Well, yeah,
African
well, now you're
slave.
bringing up the class issue, which is a real thing. So,
So that's really interesting. So, but when I'm saying in World War II and Korea, other races, you're talking about, that was pretty much every
well,
nation by the ancient standards would have been a race.
how about I throw this
you
in
know.
there? So, not to challenge you, obviously, I can't abide that, people look like you and you exterminated them. But in terms of like the Japanese and like you mentioned the Koreans, there was this, I would say there's a sense of, well, how dare you? How dare you finally fight us and actually beat us on your own terms? So there's that other thing you can say that were like, I mean, the Asians kicked the asses of the Europeans early on in the battles that you had in that war, and so there's sort of like almost like the way the British felt about the Italians when the Italians would actually defeat them in battle. They couldn't even admit to it because these Italians were not to be respected as a lower race or which they would say. But there seems to be almost like an anger that these people are actually getting the better of you at some point, and then that's just my input on it.
Yeah. I think that there's kind of a disconnect when you get to the Industrial War because you've got mixed definitions of what a race is at that point, and largely because of the scaling up of society and industrialization. So I don't know.
Also, I don't mean to jump into and then the flip side of that is also like they can be nice to the groups that they think are so far beneath them, but when you're dealing with, let's say, Far East Asians, who, I mean, they had civilizations, they had at one point, they were beyond, Europeans and whatever.
Right.
So there's also that all as well, where it's like, you can be nice to the people you think will never be a threat to you, whereas you have a real problem with the people that at one point were better than you. Well, I don't want to say better, but you know what I'm saying. There's sort of that as well.
And under Islam, when there was the initial conquests of the Christian, Hebrew, Zoroastrian, and Hindu territories, they had to sort out initially anybody that was a heathen needed to be exterminated.
Right.
There was no call for the Muslims to out of hand slaughter Christians or Jews because they're desirable as a tax base.
Yeah.
And because you didn't tax fellow Muslims, and they were considered people of the book.
Right.
Now that eventually, that people of the book thing was extended to people of other books, like the Zoroastrians, and different people of the subcontinent, like Hindus. There was actually debates amongst Muslim scholars as to whether it should the people of the book should just be considered anybody that has a written body of religious laws, and eventually the opinion was propagated that yes, that was the case. People with a written body of laws should not just be exterminated out of hand, they should be enslaved and taxed. And that has since been extended to atheists, which is to say most of the Western world is atheistic, but you still have codified religious laws in the forms of constitutions and and legal codes. So, and that continues to this day.
So we went a bit long, but like I said, this is the lecture series, so this is for the real fans, the real watchers. I will say one thing, just I'll add something to it. Maybe I'm not, as knowledgeable as you, but just like with the Mongols in China, when they realized what the scope of wiping out the Chinese would be in terms of how many people there are, I always think that sometimes the Muslims were kind of like, yeah, there's too many of these people on the subcontinent. We could be doing this for like 300 years and still not be, halfway through. So we'll adapt. We'll be flexible.
That seems to have been part of it, the effort required. And in Persia, it included the tough terrain, digging people out of the mountains.
Yeah. But luckily, that's it. All right. So we did a lecture series. We're gonna do that another one. Oh, you got something else?
No, I just apologize for.
No, dude. This is like
spending too much time trying to dig through the moldering archives in the brain.
This is high quality stuff, man. So I'll put it behind a paywall.
Thanks.
I'll make enough to buy a coffee. All right.